Sup, y'all? Welcome back to a Under the Blanket session of the JY Show. Yes, this is what it's like to have a slumber party with me, y'all. Just gonna read some Beethoven. Now, where did we leave off? Chapter 4 Deafness. We will probably never know why Beethoven's hearing began to deteriorate in his late 20s. Determining the cause of deafness, even in living patients today, can be a challenge. Forensic pathologists who have reviewed the symptoms the composer described at various times have suggested at least a dozen possible causes, ranging from a bad fall to rheumatism, typhus, lead poisoning, and various hereditary diseases of the ear. Beethoven seems to have begun noticing auditory problems sometime around 1798. His pain was both physical and emotional. He confided in 1801 to Franz Gerhard Wegler, his childhood friend from Bonn, that his ears whoosh and roar constantly night and day. He told Wegler that he had consulted a series of doctors and that they had prescribed various cures for his horrid conditions: cold baths, lukewarm baths, almond oil, pills, tea poured into the ears, none of which had done any good. For almost 2 years, he reported, he had avoided social gatherings, for he could not, as a musician, tell people that he was deaf. What would my enemies think, whose numbers are not inconsiderable, say about that? Here's a lengthy quote. To give some idea of this prodigious deafness, I would tell you that in the theater I have to place myself right next to the orchestra and even lean up against the railing in order to understand the actor. If I am a bit further away, I do not hear the high notes of the instruments or voices. It is remarkable that there are people who have never studied this in conversation. They believe it's because I so often seem distracted. Heaven alone knows what will come of this. I have already often cursed the Creator in my existence. Plutarch has guided me to resignation. If it is otherwise possible, I want to defy my fate, even though there will be moments in my life where I shall be God's unhappiest creature. Back to Bonds. The composer's anxiety over his growing deafness came to a head in the fall of 1802, toward the end of a months-long stay in the spa village of Hegelstad. That's outside Vienna at the time, but now within the city limits. The Heiligenstadt Testament is a remarkable document, one that must have consumed as much of his time and attention as any major composition up to that point. Written in what for him is an exceptionally clear hand, it is almost certainly a clean copy of an earlier, now lost draft that was presumably full of revisions. Directed to his two brothers, the document opens with the words, O ihr Menschen, roughly, to all humanity. This is in effect Beethoven's apology for himself, an explanation for his antisocial behavior. He laments the loss of the one sense so vital to a musician, a sense he felt he possessed to a degree that few others in my profession have or have had. He acknowledges, I should always say quote and end quote, huh? So what is that? He laments the loss of the one sense so vital to a musician, a sense he felt he possessed to a degree that, quote, few others in my profession have had or have, end quote. He acknowledges that his advancing deafness has driven him from society and made him seem agnostic, obstinate, or misanthropic, and he resolves to circulate in society only when he must. Some more quotes. If I approach any gathering of people, I am overcome with a deep anxiety for fear of the danger that my condition will be noticed. What a humiliation when someone standing next to me heard a flute from afar and I heard nothing, or when someone heard a shepherd singing and I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the edge of despair. Only a little more of this and I should have taken my own life. It was only art that held me back. It seemed to me impossible to leave the world before having produced everything that I felt called upon to bring forth. And so I endured this miserable life, truly miserable. Patience, it is said, is what I must now choose as my guide. Already in my 28th year, I am compelled to become a philosopher. This is not easy for an artist, more difficult than for just anyone. Lord, you look down on my innermost self. You know and recognize that a love of humanity and a proclivity to good deeds lies there within. O ye who at some point read this, O ye who at some point read this, consider that you have done me wrong. And may the unhappy one console himself by finding one of his kind who, in spite of all the impediments of nature, nevertheless did everything in its capacity to be accepted into the circle of worthy artists and humans. Damn. Wow. The document concludes with brief instructions for the dispersal of his estate after his death, in an expression of thanks to his physician and to his principal patron at the time, Prince Lichnowsky. A few days later, he added his heartbreaking postscript. Thus I take leave of you, and unhappily so. Yes, I must now abandon the beloved hope that I brought with me here, to Helligstadt, of being healed, at least to some degree. I leave here almost as I came. Even the high spirit that often possessed me in the beautiful days of summer has vanished. O destiny, let a day of pure joy appear to me just once. For so long has the inner resonance of joy been foreign to me. O when, Lord, can I find that resonance again in the temple of nature and of mankind? Never? No. Oh, that would be too harsh. I need a little sippy sip of some of my water. Back to Bonds. Joy, by this reckoning, would come in the form of inner resonance, perceived sound. Having completed his highly personal message to posterity, Beethoven locked it away in a secret compartment of his writing desk, where it lay undiscovered until after his death. As it turned out, his condition would stabilize somewhat in the decade that followed, but the Heiligenstadt Testament was no passing moment of despair. It would prove a roadmap for the conduct of his life. He avoided large gatherings whenever possible and developed sense of coping as needed. His reputation for sullenness and self-absorption no doubt helped in this regard. And he made good on the calling to bring forth as much as he could in the time allotted him. The decade that followed was even more productive than the one before. What was left of his hearing took another sharp turn for the worse around 1812. However, he began using an ear trumpet on occasion, an inverted megaphone inserted into the ear, in effect, and by 1818 had to resort to conversation books, though eyewitness accounts made it clear that he did not always need them. He was never totally deaf, and it is possible he understood certain voices or voices in certain registers better than others. Deafness posed a greater obstacle to Beethoven's career as a performer than as a composer. Widely regarded as one of the city's greatest piano virtuosos, he had to give up performing in public around 1815. He was still playing at private gatherings as late as 1822, but witnesses describe him as playing far too loudly at times, and so softly at times that even his listeners could hear nothing. He was nevertheless eager to keep up to date with the latest advances in piano technology. Viennese, French, and English pianos differed in their mechanisms, tone, and range, and he was particularly taken with the English Broadwood that the manufacturer sent him as a gift in 1818. Soon afterward, he began experimenting with an apparatus on top of the instrument, a shell-shaped device that amplified its sound by directing it immediately toward the player seated at the keyboard. Recent hypothetical reconstructions of this resonator have produced intriguing results and helped give at least some sense of what Beethoven might have heard while at work on his last three piano sonatas, opuses 109, 110, and 111. Oh, neat. Here are a couple of pictures of some of the ear trumpets that he had. For you audio listeners, it kind of looks like a very small bucket, some sort of bucket. And there's like a little ear ring around it, kind of like an ear ring on the end of like your glasses. So it's kind of like meant to just hang on like glasses, I guess. Yeah. Going onwards. Deafness also compromised Beethoven's ability as a conductor. Even if it did not inhibit him from making extreme gesticulations on the podium, as one eyewitness observed in 1814, quote, seized by the power of tones and striving to flow with them, he created a highly interesting spectacle. When the music becomes soft, he spontaneously crouches down and keeps things together with only a faint movement of the arms. When the music gets loud, he grapples like a giant with his entire body. He beats, he flails. In short, he is himself the living image of his music. Back to Bonds. Entertaining as this display may have been, his technique left much to be desired, and multiple accounts describe the confusion he was apt to sow among an orchestra's players. One performance of Fidelio in 1822 was nothing short of a calamity. He was compelled to leave in the middle of the opera and cede the baton to someone else. By the time of the premiere of the Ninth Symphony, he indicated the tempo at the beginning of each movement, but did not actually conduct. How did deafness affect Beethoven's ability to compose? And did it manifest itself in his music? Without downplaying the hardship of his condition, we must keep in mind that composers who have lost their hearing typically retain the capacity to imagine music in their mind's ear. They can still read a score and recreate the sound in their heads. A deaf composer, in other words, is not necessarily as remarkable as a blind painter. As for the effects of deafness on specific compositions, we can only speculate. More than one critic has called attention to the close temporal proximity of the Heiligenstadt Testament and Christ on the Mount of Olives, 1802. That's Beethoven's only oratorio. This telling of the Passion story gives unusual prominence of Christ's acceptance of his fate, and the composer must surely have been aware of the parallel to his own suffering. Deafness would have also aggravated his self-confessed tendency towards melancholy, a condition he complained of as early as 1787 and explicitly portrayed in the finale of his string quartet in B-flat major, Opus 18, number 6, from 1800, which he labeled La Melanconia. The labyrinthine progression of increasingly dissonant harmonies at the beginning of this movement, as one scholar has recently suggested, supports the idea that this passage might represent the experience of encroaching deafness. From his many consultations with physicians, Beethoven would undoubtedly have had a basic knowledge of the structure of the inner ear and its labyrinth. The crisis in the finale of Opus 18, number 6, is resolved when the music shifts to a new theme at a fast tempo in the major mode. But the crisis is not resolved in a single step. The slow-moving dissonances return later on, quite unexpectedly, only to be vanquished once again. Happens a lot in the 8th Symphony as well. That's my note. The same pattern appears in the finale of the 5th Symphony, 1807, another work that critics have connected to the composer's deafness. One particularly intriguing reading of the work observes that the order in which the wind instruments drop out one by one toward the end of the third movement mirrors Beethoven's own description of his gradual loss of hearing. The flutes, the highest instrument, are altogether absent from the opening theme, returns, referring back to something Beethoven wrote. He wrote, "What a humiliation when someone standing next to me heard a flute from afar and I heard nothing." Onwards. The clarinets and oboes in the middle register are the next to drop out, leaving at the end only the bassoons, the lowest of the wind instruments. But even these disappear, and toward the end of the movement we hear only the rumbling of the low strings with an odd croaking figure that might conceivably approximate the constant rumbling sound he heard in his own ears. This passage of extreme and extended low volume, more than a minute and a half in performance, flows without a break into the finale, whose opening, marked fortissimo, extremely loud, introduces instruments not heard before in this work: 3 trombones, a piccolo, and a contrabassoon. The sudden contrast in volume is overwhelming. The trombones are easily the loudest instruments in the orchestra, and the new winds extend the upper and lower boundaries of the ensemble's register. The piccolo is higher than any instrument we have heard up to this point. The contrabassoon was low as the lowest. As in the finale of Opus 18, number 6, the crisis repeats itself. The passage with the ominous low volume from the end of the third movement returns and is followed once again by an overwhelming loud fanfare. Definitely a lot of silence drawing people in and then surprising you. Beethoven's very much known to do that. Maybe I should also point out when I'm putting my thoughts into it too. Now back to Bonds. More than a few critics have found the tone of this jubilant finale to ring hollow. It is a little too jubilant, insisting on a sense of triumph so forcefully and at such length as to call into question the conviction behind its expression. This is a fair criticism, to be sure. Again, there is no right or wrong ways to hear his music, but no one would deny the audible trajectory from crisis to triumph, and if we think of the Fifth Symphony as an essay in ideals, we can hear it as Beethoven's imagined recovery for his longed-for inner resonance. Indeed, the pointed contrast in volume throughout the Fifth Symphony lends support to Anton Schindler's report of the composer likening the opening motif of the first movement to fate pounding at the portal. The common English translation, thus, "Fate knocks at the door," misses the violence and scale of the original German, "So pocht das Schicksal an die Pforte." I don't know. Anyways. This might well be yet another of Schindler's many fabrications. On the other hand, we can speak of emotions in music only metaphorically, and if the theme of the Sixth Symphony, pastoral, is nature, it is not so far-fetched to think of the Fifth, written at the same time, as an essay on fate and the struggle against it. Is this how Beethoven intended us to hear these works? Perhaps. But even if one accepts such speculative readings, they do not exhaust their implications of the music. Those who are inclined to search for autobiographical clues in his music are likely to accept Schindler's report about the Fifth Symphony's meaning. They are also likely to connect that report with Beethoven's promise to grab fate by the throat in his 1801 letter to Wegler, in which he confessed his growing deafness. That the context of this vow is medical rather than musical makes no difference to those predisposed to hear the life in the works. The composer's quoted line about fate appears after a long list of health complaints, comments on his current doctor, inquiries about Wegler's opinion on other physicians and possible treatments, including galvanism, the use of electrical currents to stimulate the auditory nerves. There is not the slightest suggestion that the act of grabbing fate by the throat might manifest itself musically. To what extent the composer's personal emotions found their way into his music remains a question that defies any clear answer. As far as his deafness is concerned, we can say with certainty only that his disability helped him, indeed forced him, to approach his art from a highly uncommon perspective. What an interesting take on his deafness, right? Not overly romanticized, but also like, a little. A little romanticized. Chapter 5. Love. Beethoven, his student Ferdinand Ries recalled, was frequently in love, but usually only for a very short time. He appreciated the female form, especially beautiful, youthful faces, but he never married, and therein lies the tale. A longing for marriage is a theme that runs throughout his correspondence, at least in earlier years. He proposed, or at least seriously considered proposing, in 1810 to Therese Malfatti, the 18-year-old daughter of a Viennese banker. Beethoven was close to the family for a time, but for reasons that remain unclear, he was abruptly forbidden access to the household, other than for musical occasions. Perhaps Therese's father, or Therese herself, wanted to make it clear that a personal relationship between the two of them had no future. The composer's most intense love interest, however, was an unidentified woman whose existence is known only through a lengthy 3-part letter Beethoven sent her in July 1812. Toward the end of it, he calls her "my immortal beloved," and the name, with added uppercase letters, has stuck. The identity of the immortal beloved has occupied critics, scholars, and amateur sleuths ever since. Each writer invariably declares the mystery solved beyond all doubt. Just as invariably, another writer reaches a different conclusion with equal conviction. Among the many candidates proposed over the years are Countess Giulietta Guicciardi, Countess Therese Brunswick, Countess Josephine Brunswick, her sister, Countess Anna Marie Erdodi, Baroness Dorothea Ertmann. I'm reading these out like I'm taking attendance for a class or something. Countess Almeri Esterhazy here, and Antoni Brentano which one? Antoni Brentano ne von Berkenstad? Yes, that one. Quite aside from issues of chronology, the idea of the composer's sister-in-law, Johanna von Beethoven, as the title character of the 1994 film, Immortal Beloved, cannot be taken seriously. Okay, so that one is not apparently kosher with the theories. Anyways, that so many names have been put forward, even this list is selective, gives credence to Ries's recollection that the composer was frequently in love, but usually only for a short time. And it might be added, with women for whom there was a little chance of marriage or a long-term relationship because they were of noble birth, already married, or both. Armchair psychiatrists have had a field day with this, and they have a point, for in a roundabout way, Beethoven's attraction to women who are socially unattainable ensured that a personal attachment to another individual would not in the end conflict with his overriding commitment to his art. Oh, what if I bring y'all closer, like this? I'm just gonna bring y'all a little closer. Oh, hopefully I don't cause extra noise. Okay. Based on the documentation that has come to light over the years, The two most plausible candidates are Antony Brentano and Josephine von Brunswick-Daim-Stackelberg. Whatever the merits of each, the history of the letter and the search for the identity of the immortal beloved have much to tell us about Beethoven's side of the affair and about listeners' responses to some of his most famous works. How did Beethoven come to have this letter addressed to someone else in his own possession? It was discovered in a secret compartment of his writing desk after his death, along with a Heiligenstadt Testament. I'm just an Asian guy who just learned English trying to pronounce a German word. I don't know. On this letter, he wanted to keep it, and he wanted it kept a secret, at least as long as he was alive. Either he never sent the letter or the woman to whom it was addressed returned it to him. Returned it to him because she could not risk having it found in her possession. The latter seems the more likely explanation. The very year in which the letter was written was long a matter of dispute, though scholars now mostly agree that it was written over July 6th and 7th, 1812, when the composer was in Bad Teplitz, a Bohemian spa town, now Teplitz in the Czech Republic. The woman's identity revolves around such circumstantial bits of evidence as coach schedules, mail deliveries, and police records that document the arrival and departure dates of visitors to Bad Teplitz and nearby Carlsbad around that time. The best evidence suggests that Beethoven and the immortal beloved had shared a passionate encounter in Prague in early July. Beethoven proceeded from there to Bad Teplitz in July 4th, and she departed around the same time for Carlsbad. Wow, that's a lot of sleuthing they had to do. Having arrived in Teplitz late the night before, Beethoven began his letter with the words, "My angel, my all, my own self." Only a few words today and in pencil, namely yours. Love demands everything, and rightly so, and thus it is for me with you, and for you with me. End quote. He then related the details of his harrowing 2-day, mud-filled journey to Prague. He resumed his letter later that evening, having learned that the mail coach to Carlsbad left only on Monday and Thursday mornings, which meant that it would be several days yet before his beloved would hear from him. "You are suffering, my dearest creature. Ah, wherever I am, you are also with me, and we speak with each other. I shall arrange it that I can live with you. What a life! Thus!" That's the word I use to test my gain levels, is thus. Yeah. "And as much as you love me, I love you still more." End quote. And the next morning he wrote in conclusion, begin quote, "Already, while still in bed, my thoughts rush to you, my immortal beloved, all times joyfully and then sorrowfully, waiting to learn if fate had hurt us. I can live either wholly with you or not at all. Yes, I have resolved to wander in faraway places until I can fly into your arms and call myself entirely at home with you, and can send my soul enwrapped by you into the realm of spirits. No other woman than you can possess my heart. None. None. O God, why must one be so separated from what one loves so much? And yet my life in Vienna is a miserable life. Your love makes me at once the happiest and unhappiest of men. Be calm. Only through calm contemplation of our existence can we achieve our goal of living together. Be calm. Love me. Today, yesterday, what tearful longing for you, my life, my all. Farewell. Oh, continue to love me. Never underestimate the truest heart of your beloved. Ever yours, ever mine, ever ours." Back to Bond, or Bonds. my mistake. Whatever the identity of the immortal beloved, Beethoven's relationship with her shook him to the core. Their affair ended at some point in the second half of 1812, almost certainly broken off by the woman in question. And it was toward the end of that year that the composer began keeping his diary, a document whose first entry concludes with these words: "O God, give me strength to conquer myself. Nothing at all must fetter me to life. In this manner, with A, everything goes to ruin." A? A may have been Antony Brentano, but we know that composer's diary only through transcriptions made by others. And A could well be a copyist's misreading of ST, which in turn would point to Josephine von Brunswick-Stackelberg. In any case, the end of the affair and the apparent impossibility of its resumption made it clear to Beethoven once and for all that domestic bliss was not in his future. If the Heiligenstadt Testament reflects the self-realization that resignation was the only way to deal with his growing deafness, then the diary reflects his resignation to the reality of spending the rest of his life alone. The very fact that he should feel compelled to begin keeping a journal of his private thoughts points to a resolution to open a new chapter in his life and to mark the occasion with a new kind of sketchbook. One that would record his ideas about the conduct of his life in ways both large and small, personal and professional. It is well worth remembering that the diary's second entry addresses technical questions of voice leading in music. Composition was rarely far from his mind. How did this affair manifest itself in his music? Anton Schindler, who in 1840 was the first to publish the letter to the immortal beloved, maintained that Beethoven possessed the true soul of an artist, and that this soul manifested itself to varying degrees in every one of his works. To Schindler's mind, Beethoven's one great love was Giulietta Guicciardi and the Moonlight Sonata of 1802, Sonata quasi una fantasia, opus 27, number 2, was the composer's musical love letter to her. What genius, Schindler asked, could have written the Fantasia in C-sharp minor without such a love? And let it be said here, if only in passing, it is his love for Giulietta, the dedicatee of this work, that inspired him to create it. End quote. But Schindler had misstated the letter to the beloved, the immortal beloved, and his hypothesis is now largely rejected. This did not, however, oh man, it's getting kind of dark here. Oh, wait. Oh, excellent. But Schindler had misstated the letter to the immortal beloved, and his hypothesis is now largely rejected. This did not, however, prevent his report from setting in motion a tradition of critical commentary that links the sonata with erotic love. The languorous, plangent first movement of the Moonlight Sonata, according to this tradition, embodies longing, its violent finale a renunciation of that longing. A more plausible candidate for a veiled message to the immortal beloved is the 1816 song cycle In die fern Geliebte, opus 98, To the Distant Beloved. It was composed in the same year, after all, that the composer had written to Ries, "Best greetings to your wife. Unfortunately, I have none." I should have said, begin quote. "Best greetings to your wife. Unfortunately, I have none. I found only one whom I shall certainly never possess. I am nevertheless no misogynist." End quote. The immortal beloved was still clearly on his mind some 4 years after the end of the affair, and this is indeed an unusual work, the most innovative of all his compositions for work and piano. It is not merely a collection of songs, but the first true song cycle in which the individual numbers move through a quasi-narrative sequence, and even share musical motifs in subtle ways. What makes the set even more unusual is that Beethoven directs the 6 songs to be performed continuously without a pause between them. He would later use the same strategy in the 7-movement string quartet in C-sharp minor, opus 131. New research has shown that the song cycle's beloved is distant because she is deceased. It now seems clear that the cycle was commissioned by Prince Lobkowski, Lobkowitz, Prince Lobkowitz, as a memorial to his late wife, Maria Caroline. In the opening song, the hill on which the singer tells us he is sitting is a metaphor for a grave, and the title page indeed shows a male lutenist singing and a distant female figure high up in the clouds. The motivation behind the commission does not in any way preclude the idea that Beethoven thought of his own immortal beloved in composing this work. Compositional treatises had long emphasized that in order to project an emotion, a composer must have had some personal experience of it, and Beethoven's music is undoubtedly the richer for the intensity of the affair. Yet we should remain wary of assertions and insist on drawing direct lines between any of his various relationships in specific works of music. In this sense, the affair that the immortal beloved was an important event that shaped his larger vision of life, which in turn contributed to the more specific vision of his art. Very nice. So we got through some important stuff about deafness and about love. The next chapter looks like it's going to be about money, which is of course very important. So hopefully this episode has a bit better sound quality. I'm going to keep at it. Alright, hope you enjoyed. Check y'all later.